Hello, Jim.
Hello. This is Jim Flynn.
Oh, hi, this is Mark Halloran. Thanks very much for doing this, Jim. I really appreciate it.
I'll enjoy it, I'm sure.
I wanted to start with a question about your father, who I read was a socialist democrat. I think the story about being locked out of the factory when the workers voted for William Jennings Bryan was a pretty powerful one.
Yep.
And how he helped Eugene Victor Debs, president of the American Socialist Party, out of jail after he was branded a traitor by President Woodrow Wilson. I just was interested in the influence your father has had on your life, politically and in terms of your work.
Well, he didn't, I think, influence my life as directly as going to the University of Chicago. I mean, it's true that I was raised in a household where I had a father who had a favorable view of the Democrats, particularly insofar as they were behind the trade unions and the workers. I think also of equal importance was going to the University of Chicago and being in about the only atmosphere in the party era where to be progressive was actually in fashion.
I think what I took away from your book, one of the most interesting things was the right wing or conservative, the power within universities at the time that you were a young academic seeking tenure and how that affected your career. And you talked about essentially the power that was wielded by conservatives within universities and how that's very different today from the power that's wielded by, say, far left groups within universities.
Well, it's more vicious in that it extends off campus. I mean, not that some of the left-wing groups don't resort to saying that they'll beat up your family and your kids, but they don't usually, and they may have the power to bounce you from university. They don't usually have the power that was operative during the McCarthy period, where if you were a working-class person, prevent you from getting into a public housing project. Or if you're a teacher, you had to take a loyalty oath to teach in the New York City schools. Or they could try and get you banned from any government employment or harass your relatives. So in that sense, it was much more serious. You know, they had more weapons. Now, I've heard right-wingers excuse this and saying, oh, we were just against the communists. But they quite consciously use that as a club to say socialists are communists and therefore we'll beat up on them. And liberals are really communist sympathizers and will beat up on them as well. There were a few screwballs who, I guess, thought of all this as an anti-communist crusade. But the right wing in general was very pleased to see that they could effectively immobilize virtually their entire opposition by linking them to communism.
I know that you said that nothing the left has done within universities in the last 50 years approaches the totalitarian regime that the right ran when it was running in universities.
You mean when the right were in control?
When the right were in control, yeah.
Yes, well, they were in control effectively throughout much of American history. I mean, there was the Red Scare after World War I, and America had heads of universities who considered themselves devout Protestants who wanted to get rid of atheists. And they, of course, were terribly anti-gay. So there was about 100 years, really, from the time of the Civil War up through the Korean War, where you had mainly right-wing control of universities, and people who were liberal or left had to suffer the consequences. Now, mine was one of the few where students were protected by Robert Hutchins, the chancellor, because he was always a good civil libertarian, and while his views were conservative, he was very dedicated to academic freedom and tried to protect his students or staff wherever he could. So I didn't have much problem as a student at Chicago. It was when I faced the outer world, which was still under the control of the right wing in most universities at that time.
Do you think that the right now uses the examples that occur in some of these universities, extreme behaviour?
I mean, people say to me, oh, it's a fight between the right and the left.
Yes.
You've lived long enough that you don't trust the right wing. You know if they were controlled, they'd be persecuting us. And indeed, they try to when they can. I mean, sometimes they invite speakers in the hope they will be banned, so they'll have a cause célèbre. And other times, if someone on campus actually takes a left-leaning position, they try to get them banned. And my answer to that is dual. First, why give them ammunition? Why make it appear that they have free speech on their side by giving them so many cases that they can legitimately prosecute? Why not starve them of ammunition? And the reason, of course, is that most of the left don't believe in free speech either. They're pretending they do, some of them now, because they're suffering from this persecution, just as the right, of course, are pretending that they believe in free speech because they see that their people are being outed. But it's very rare to find people who aren't involved in this type of culture war between the right and left and are willing to forbear doing to the other side what they feel is being done to them.
Well, reading your book, it made me think that I wondered when the university had really ever been a place where you had freedom of speech.
It varies so much from place to place. I mean, as I say in one chapter, Chicago today is a much more secure place from left-wing persecution than, let's say, either Harvard is or Princeton. And certainly more so than at these universities or Yale. I think I compared, do I not, Harvard and Yale with Chicago as three universities. And even when I taught, you were relatively safe if you were a lecturer of Chicago. Remember, the better the university, the more they have people who actually don't like persecution and violation of free speech. So what would leave you reasonably safe at Harvard or Chicago exposes you to the mob if you teach at some place that is less elevated than that. And also it depends a good deal as to whether people on campus spend all their time organizing, persecuting people who don't agree with them. I mean, Middlebury is the case. I don't think the people who run Middlebury really wanted to run Charles Murray off campus. Indeed, they made every effort not to. It was essentially the students who played along with the townspeople and declared him essentially a non-person. That's not true everywhere. You're not going to find that type of student militant behavior at, let's say, Farley Dickinson.